Before the sun clears the rooftops,
A hand reaches for a tall brass pot. The pot is called a dalla. Inside it, coffee has been kept warm since the first grey light. Pale, thin, scented with cardamom, sometimes with saffron, sometimes with a few bruised threads of clove. The hand lifts it, tilts it, and a thin stream falls into a small cup with no handle. The cup is filled only a quarter of the way, not because the coffee is running low, because that is the rule. You have probably seen this country before, or you think you have. Towers of glass, standing shoulder to shoulder along a shoreline, gold stacked in shop windows, cars that cost more than houses, fountains lit at night in the middle of a desert. The picture arrives before the place does, a picture of wealth, of excess, of a life bought rather than lived. And the towers are real. The gold is real. The fountains run every evening, exactly as you imagine them. But the cup in your host's hand is still only a quarter full. And the water that made the coffee inside it, and the water he rinsed his hands and face with before the dawn prayer, and the water in that fountain, and every single drop that will pass any lip in this country today, was, an hour ago, part of the sea. This is the Arabian Gulf. 6 countries strung along one warm, shallow body of water. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman. Between them, they hold some of the highest incomes on Earth, and not one of them has a single permanent river. Not a stream that runs all year, not a lake you could kneel down and drink from. The maps show blue lines at the edges, but those are the sea, and the sea is salt. So the question this place asks is quieter than its skyline suggests. Not how a people became rich, but how a people live an ordinary day. How they wake and eat and welcome a stranger and put their children to sleep in a land that, by every older measure, should never have been able to keep them alive. The answer is not in the towers, it is in the smaller things. The quarter-full cup, the careful splash of water before prayer, the single platter that a whole family eats from with the same hand. Habits so old they look like nothing more than manners, and turn out in the end to be the reason the whole thing holds together. Let me begin where the day begins, before the heat, before the light. It is still dark when the first sound arrives. From the minaret of the neighborhood mosque, the call to prayer moves out across the rooftops, the first of 5 that will mark this day, and every day. It is not read from a clock, it is read from the sky. The dawn prayer, Fajr, comes when the first pale thread of light separates from the black horizon, and so it shifts a little earlier or later with every passing week of the year. In this part of the world, the day has always been told by the sun before it was ever told by a watch. A man rises in the dark and goes to wash. This is where the day's first meeting with water happens, and it is worth watching closely because it will explain a great deal later. He does not run the tap and let it pour. He wets his hands, his mouth, his face, his forearms, the crown of his head, his feet, each in a set order 3 times over, and he does it with a startlingly small amount of water. A cupped handful is nearly enough. There is a teaching, more than 1,000 years old, that a believer should not be wasteful with water even while washing on the bank of a flowing river, even beside a river, in a land that never had one. Hold on to that, a rule about rivers in a country with none. We will come back to it.
For now, the washing is done.
The prayer is offered, and the coldest, gentlest hour of the day opens up. The air will not be this kind again until long after dark. Bread is warmed. Dates are set out in a shallow dish, dark and glistening. Tea is poured, red-brown and sweet. A child is walked to a waiting bus while the shadows are still long and the pavement can still be touched with a bare hand. For an hour or two, the Gulf feels almost temperate, a soft, blue-grey world of quiet streets and open windows. Everyone here knows it will not last. They move through the morning the way people everywhere move through anything brief and good, without hurry, but without wasting it either. Before the market of spices and dates opens, another market has already come and nearly gone, down at the water's edge. The Gulf is shallow and warm, and for all its scarcity of fresh water, it has never been short of fish. Long before dawn, small boats come back into the harbours of Kuwait, of Bahrain, of Muscat, and the Emirati coast, riding low with the night's catch. On the quay, the fish market runs at its own early hour because fish and heat are enemies, and the trading must be done while the air is still cool. Hamur, the thick-bodied grouper, prized above almost anything else here. Silver kingfish, prawns from the muddy shallows, sardines by the crate. This is the older half of the Gulf's bond with the sea, and it long predates the towers. The same water that offered no drink offered food, and a people who could not farm a dry land learned instead to read the tides, the winds, the seasons of the fish. The dhow, the wooden boat with the curved prow that carried pearl divers and traders for centuries, still exists here, some working, many kept and raced and loved as the memory of what this coast was before oil. A cook picks over the catch with care because tonight's platter may be built on it. Fish laid over the same spiced rice, or grilled whole, or dried and salted the old way for the months when the boats stay in. The sea that cannot be drunk is still, in this one respect, the larder it always was. The Gulf takes its food from the water, and its drink, as we will come to see, from the water too, but only after wringing the salt from it first. By the time the sun is properly up, the market of the land is already awake. They call it the Souk. In the old quarters of every Gulf city, there is one, a warren of narrow lanes, shaded by high walls and woven roofing, where the day's trade is done before the heat makes trade unbearable. The scent tells you where you are before your eyes adjust. Cardamom and cinnamon in open sacks, dried limes stacked in pyramids, frankincense smoking somewhere out of sight. And everywhere, in boxes and baskets and towers, dates. Dozens of kinds of dates, sorted by softness and color and price. There is one plant behind those towers of dates that could live where almost nothing else would, and the Gulf owes it more than it can easily say. The date palm asks for very little, a little brackish water at its roots, and the fierce sun this land has in endless supply, and in return, it gives a fruit that is nearly a complete food, sweet, dense with energy, and dried, able to keep for a year without spoiling. For the people of this coast, before refrigeration and before imports, the date was survival itself, the thing you could carry across a desert, store through a lean season, and live on when little else was to be had. A traveler with a handful of dates and a skin of water could cross ground that would kill an unprepared man. That is why the date still sits at the center of Gulf welcome, beside the coffee offered to every guest, and why the fast of Ramadan is broken each evening with a single date before anything else. It is not sentiment. It is memory, worn smooth into custom. The fruit that once stood between this coast and hunger is now the fruit you press into a visitor's palm. Because here, the deepest form of welcome has always been to share the thing that keeps you alive. To understand why the souk sits at the center of Gulf life, why trade and the manners of trade runs so deep here, you have to go back to a time before oil, before glass, before any of it. Picture the same coastline 300 years ago. There are no towers. There is a strip of low houses made of coral stone and mud, a line of wooden boats drawn up on the sand, and behind them, the desert. The men are gone for months at a time. They are out on the water, on long wooden dhows, diving for pearls.
A diver fills his lungs,
Clamps a peg on his nose, and drops to the seabed with a stone tied to his foot and a basket around his neck. He stays down for a minute, sometimes longer, prying oysters loose in the dark, then tugs the rope to be hauled up. He does this again and again and again, from sunrise to sunset, through a season that lasts 4 months. Many go blind, many drown. The whole fragile economy of this coast hangs on a gamble at the bottom of the sea. It was a hard, thin way to live, and it made the people who lived it into 2 things at once. Traders, because a pearl is worthless until it is sold, and selling meant welcoming merchants from India, from Persia, from the far side of the Arabian Sea. And hosts, because on a coast with almost no water and almost no food, a stranger turned away was a stranger left to die, and a stranger welcomed today might be the one who welcomes you tomorrow. That is the root of it. Hospitality here did not begin as decoration. It began as infrastructure, the operating system of a society that survived by trading with and depending on people it had never met. The date seller who presses a fruit into your palm before you have bought anything, the merchant who offers coffee before he mentions price. They are running a program written centuries ago on a coast where generosity was not a virtue so much as a survival strategy. The pearls are long gone now. The oyster banks collapsed almost overnight in the 1930s when someone in Japan learned to grow pearls in a farm. But the habits the pearls built outlived them. They are still here, in the souk, in the coffee, in the open door. Not all of the Gulf's hospitality happens in the cushioned quiet of a private room. Some of it happens at a roadside window in a paper cup for the price of a coin. Pull off almost any road in the Gulf and you will find a small cafeteria, a counter, a griddle, a kettle always on, and at that counter, Karak. Karak is strong black tea, boiled hard with milk, sugar, and cardamom, sometimes saffron or ginger poured scalding into a small cup. It is not ancient the way the coffee is. It came with the workers and traders from India and Pakistan and Iran over the last century, and it has become, quietly, the most democratic drink in the region, sipped by a laborer at the end of his shift and a Qatari teenager leaning on an expensive car in the very same doorway, from the very same cup. There is a whole rhythm built around it. A driver pulls up, flashes his headlights, and the boy at the counter carries the Karak out to the car window without a word exchanged. A roadside ritual so common it has its own quiet etiquette. In the cool of the evening, these small cafeterias become gathering points of their own, informal majlises with no cushions and no ceremony, where the two gulfs that rarely meet, the citizen and the worker who built his city, stand for a few minutes at the same window, drinking the same sweet tea. If the coffee is the formal face of Gulf welcome, Karak is its everyday one, the small, cheap, constant kindness that keeps the long day moving. A culture that made a ceremony out of coffee also made a comfort out of tea, and between the two, no hour of the day is ever quite without something warm to offer. Follow one of those open doors home and you arrive at the true center of Gulf life. Not the market and not the mosque, but a single room. In most homes, it sits slightly apart from the rest of the house, often with its own entrance from the street, so that a guest need never walk through the family's private space to reach it. Cushions line the walls. The floor is carpeted. In the corner, on a low burner or a bed of coals, the dalla is kept warm, not for an expected visitor, but for any visitor, all day, on the assumption that someone will come. This room is called the majlis. In Kuwait, they call their version the diwaniyah. It is where business is done, where disputes are settled, where marriages are arranged, where a whole neighborhood's worth of news moves from mouth to mouth. And it turns on coffee. Watch how the coffee is served, because nearly everything about this culture is folded into it. The host, often the head of the household himself, whatever his wealth or standing, prepares it in front of you. That act alone is a message. You are worth my own hands. The cup is poured a quarter full, never more, and there is a reason. A small pour means the coffee is fresh and hot, and it means the cup will be refilled, and the refilling is the point. Each refill is another moment of contact, another small turn of the conversation. A cup filled to the brim would say, "Drink this and be done." A cup filled a quarter of the way says, "Stay." It is handed to you with the right hand always. You take it with your right hand always. You drink, and it comes again and again. When you have had enough, usually after 1 or 3, an odd number by custom, you do not say so. You give the cup a small shake from side to side as you hand it back. That tiny motion is understood from Kuwait to Oman. No words, just the shake and the pouring stops. Alongside the coffee come dates, because the coffee is bitter and unsweetened, and a date is sweet, and the two were made for each other over 1,000 years of afternoons. You are meant to take at least one. To refuse everything outright, the coffee, the date, the sitting down, is close to the only mistake in this whole encounter that is genuinely hard to undo. Everything else can be forgiven in a foreigner. That cannot, because it says, in the oldest language this coast knows, "I do not accept what you are." So the quarter-full cup does a job. It looks like leisure, a slow ceremony of coffee and small talk in a cushioned room. It is actually the machinery that holds a society of families and tribes and traders together, one refill at a time. Keep an eye on that cup and on the restraint in it. The Gulf will show you the other face of that same restraint later, at a very different table. While the guests are still gathering in the majlis, another room is already working. In the kitchen, a wide, heavy pot has been on the heat for most of the morning. Basmati rice is layered over meat, lamb or chicken or fish from the same Gulf waters, and cooked slowly in a broth stained gold with saffron and dark with dried lime, that same lumi from the souk, which gives the whole dish its faint, sour depth. Whole spices go in unbroken, cardamom pods, cinnamon bark, cloves. Bay. The dish has a different name in almost every country: makbous in Kuwait and Qatar and Bahrain, kabza in Saudi Arabia, and cousins besides. But it is the same idea everywhere. One pot, enough for everyone who might walk in. The work of a whole morning made to be shared in 20 minutes. A woman tips the rice out onto a single enormous platter, a metal tray as wide as an outstretched arm, and crowns it with the meat and a scattering of fried onions, raisins, toasted nuts. Nothing about it is portioned. There are no plates waiting in a stack. There is one tray, and there will be one circle of people around it. The heat by now has taken the city. By late morning, the temperature has climbed past 40 degrees, and in the worst of summer, it will pass 45, with a wet, heavy air rolling in off the shallow gulf that makes it feel worse still. This is the hour the outsider's picture cannot survive. The bright, busy streets you imagine simply empty. Between roughly 1 and 4 in the afternoon, a Gulf city hollows out, shutters down, lanes deserted, a white glare bouncing off empty pavement. It is not laziness, and it is not a holiday. It is survival, made routine. Across the Gulf, the law itself steps in. Through the peak summer months, outdoor labor is forbidden during the middle of the day because a body cannot safely work in that sun, and the states have written that fact into their rule books. Construction sites fall silent at noon and wake again in the cool of the evening. And where the day cannot be avoided, it is engineered around. The cities are built for the heat the way a northern city is built for the cold, in reverse. Air conditioning runs without pause in every building, every car, every covered walkway. In Dubai and beyond, the bus stops themselves are sealed glass boxes, chilled, so that no one waits for a bus in the open air. Step inside anywhere at midday, and you may want a jacket, while just beyond the glass, the heat presses down like a hand. A whole civilization has quietly agreed that the middle of the day belongs to the sun, and that people will simply take it back after dark.
So where does everyone go?
In those hollow afternoon hours. Not far. Home, mostly, behind the glass and the cooled air, resting, waiting. The city is not dead, it is holding its breath. Watch for it to exhale. The exhale comes with the fourth prayer, and then the fifth. Maghrib is called at sunset, the exact moment the sun's disk drops below the horizon, and something in the city changes with it. The light goes soft and golden and then blue. The heat begins at last to let go, and the streets that were empty at noon begin quietly to fill. It is worth pausing on those 5 prayers because they are the true skeleton of a Gulf day, more than any working hour or opening time. Fajr before dawn. Duhur after the sun passes its highest point. Asr in the late afternoon. Maghrib at sunset. Isha once the last light is gone. 5 fixed points spread across the day by the movement of the sun, so that no stretch of waking hours passes without one. Shops pause. Conversations pause. A man steps out of his own business for a few minutes and comes back to it. There is a strange precision to it. Because the prayers track the sun and not the clock, their timings drift a little every single day and differ from city to city. Mecca and Riyadh a few minutes apart, Doha and its neighbors closer still. A whole society keeps time by an astronomical event, recalculated daily, and has done so for 14 centuries. In an age when the rest of the world runs on identical digital minutes, here the day is still cut by the sun's own hand. It was not always so gently kept. In Saudi Arabia, within living memory, the link between prayer and commerce was enforced by a religious police who could compel every shop to close during the prayer windows. That power was formally stripped away in 2016, and the enforcement eased. But the rhythm did not vanish with the enforcement. The shops still thin out at prayer time. The pattern was never really about the police. It was about the sun, and the sun has not changed its habits. And then there is the one day that gathers all the others. The Gulf Week turns on Friday. It is the day of the congregational noon prayer, Jumu'ah, when the men of a neighborhood leave whatever they are doing and go together to the mosque, and the sermon is given, and the largest prayer of the week is offered shoulder to shoulder in long, still rows. The streets around a great mosque fill with cars and then empty of people, all of them drawn inside. For a half hour, the ordinary noise of the city drops to almost nothing. What follows the prayer is the true center of the Gulf Week, the Friday family lunch. This is the meal the whole clan comes to. At the grandparents' house or the eldest sons, 3 generations around the platter at once. The matchbouz, or the kabsa for a Friday, is larger than any weekdays, cooked for a crowd, because on Friday, the crowd will come. Children who have scattered into their own lives through the week return to the same tray they ate from as infants. It is the meal that stitches an extended family back together once every 7 days, whatever else the week has pulled apart. The rest of the world, over the last century, drifted toward a weekend built around leisure and shopping. The Gulf built its week around a prayer and a shared plate. In recent years, several of these states even shifted their official weekend to line the working days up more neatly with global markets. But Friday itself, the prayer and the lunch, did not move. Business hours are negotiable. Friday is not. It remains what it has long been, the hinge the whole week swings on, half devotion and half rice. And now, after Maghrib, the day the outsider never sees finally begins. The evening meal is not a quiet, private thing. It is the day's gathering, and the platter from that long morning is its center. The great tray is set down on the floor of the majlis, on a spread cloth, or on a low table, and the family and whatever guests have arrived settle around it in a ring. And here you meet the rule that governs this table. You eat with your right hand, and only your right hand. The left is kept away from the food entirely. You eat from the section of rice directly in front of you, working inward from the edge toward the center, never reaching across into someone else's part of the tray. You shape a small mouthful of rice and meat with your fingers, and you eat.
There is a whole grammar of belonging in that circle.
No one has a larger plate because no one has a plate at all. The eldest are served the best of the meat, laid in front of them without a word. A guest is pressed to eat more, always more, long after they are full. And pressing is not rudeness here, it is care made visible. To eat from one dish with one hand from the same rice is to say that under this roof there is no separating who is family and who is guest, who is high and who is low. For the length of the meal, everyone is simply someone the host is feeding. And now watch the host's hands, and remember the coffee. In the majlis, that same hand poured the cup only a quarter full, restraint, held back, deliberate. Here at the tray, that same hand piles the rice high and presses more meat toward you than any person could eat. The little cup and the heaped platter look like opposites. They are the same thing. In the coffee, generosity wears the mask of restraint, the small paw that keeps you close. At the meal, generosity wears the mask of abundance, the full tray that will not let you leave hungry. A culture shaped by scarcity learned both faces of giving, how to make a little feel like devotion and how to make plenty feel like love. The quarter-full cup and the overflowing platter are two answers to the same old question. How do you show a guest they matter in a place that never had much to spare? When the meal is finished, the day steps across a threshold, and thresholds here have rules of their own. At the door of a Gulf home sits a rack of shoes, or simply a row of them left by the frame, because shoes come off before the carpet begins. The floor of a home is clean in a way that matters. It is sat on, eaten on, prayed on, and the street is not brought into it. Step in, and the clothing tells its own quiet story. The men in the long white robe, loose and full length, called the thobe or the kandura, with a headscarf held by a dark cord. The women in the black abaya, flowing over whatever is worn beneath. In the heat, white reflects and black, worn loose, moves the air. Both are older and cleverer than they look. Let me step outside the day for a moment and name plainly the things a visitor gets wrong here, because they are rarely written down and easily stumbled over. That you may find yourself seated in a section of a restaurant marked for families, or one marked for single men, and that this is not a slight, but a sorting the culture takes for granted. That an offered coffee is not really optional. That the left hand does not touch food, or pass a gift, or shake in greeting. That a small shake of the cup, and not a word, is how you decline a refill. None of these are in the guidebook's first pages, and all of them are read instantly by the people around you. The outsider imagines this is a place you simply buy your way into. It is, in truth, a place with a grammar, and the grammar is learned at tables and thresholds, not in shops. To understand any of this, the open majlis, the platter for a crowd, the Friday that pulls everyone home, you have to understand that the household here is rarely just parents and children. The Gulf family is extended, and often it is housed that way. A compound, or a large home, where a father's married sons live with their own families around a shared courtyard, where grandparents are not sent away, but sit at the center of everything, where cousins are raised almost as siblings. The old woman who set the tray and eats last is not a guest in her children's home. In the deepest sense, it is still hers. Decisions that elsewhere would belong to a couple alone, a marriage, a move, a large purchase, are matters the wider family weighs in on, because the family is the unit that survives, and the individual within it is held, and is expected to hold others in turn. There is also a division running through this social world that an outsider notices quickly and misreads easily. Much of Gulf social life is arranged by gender: the men's majlis and the women's gathering, the family section and the singles section of a restaurant, celebrations that split into two halves. It is easy to see only separation in this, but inside it is a whole second society that the visiting eye tends to miss entirely. The women's world, with its own gatherings, its own hospitality, every bit as elaborate as the men's, its own authority over the home, the marriages, the raising of the next generation. Two social worlds run in parallel, each dense and full, meeting at the family and parting again. The home, then, is not the private retreat it is in much of the world, a place to withdraw from society. Here the home is society, or at least its beating center, the majlis open to the street, the kitchen cooking for whoever comes, 3 generations under one roof, 2 social worlds turning around one courtyard. The scattered, trading tribal coast that could only survive by binding people tightly together built its whole life around the household, and it never really stopped. Nowhere is that binding more visible than at a wedding. A Gulf wedding is not a single evening, but a season of them, and it is the moment a family renews itself in front of everyone it knows. In keeping with the divided social world, it is usually two celebrations at once, one for the men, one for the women and children, held in separate halls, sometimes on separate nights. The guest lists run to the hundreds. To leave a relative or a neighbor off that list is not a small oversight. It is a statement, and everyone reads it as one. A wedding here is how a family shows the whole community that it is strong, generous, and still standing. At the women's celebration, unseen by the men, the older arts come out. Rows of young women perform the Khaleeji, the Gulf dance whose name means simply of the Gulf, swaying slowly, their long hair moving in time in a form that is centuries old and passed from mother to daughter and cousin to cousin. There is henna, drawn in fine, dark patterns across the bride's hands and feet. There is gold, given openly, because gold at a Gulf wedding is not only ornament, but a bride's own security, wealth she keeps in her own name. And feeding the hundreds is, once again, the platter, scaled up beyond any ordinary meal, whole animals over mountains of rice, coffee poured without pause, the same customs of the everyday table simply enlarged to the size of a community. A wedding is the daily life of the Gulf, turned up as loud as it will go. The hospitality, the family, the food, the separation and the gathering, all of it on full display at once. Watch one, and you have watched nearly everything this culture believes about itself, performed across a single week. Once a year, that whole daily rhythm turns itself inside out. During the month of Ramadan, no food or water passes any adult's lips from the first light of Fajr to the sunset call of Maghrib. And a society that already lived carefully around the heat now reorganizes itself entirely around the fast. The day, in effect, inverts. The productive, sociable hours slide into the night. You can see it in the traffic. A Gulf city in Ramadan develops two rush hours that exist nowhere else in the calendar. The first comes in the last hour or two before sunset. Roads jammed, markets swollen, delivery riders racing the clock, everyone hurrying home for the meal that breaks the fast the instant Maghrib sounds. That meal, iftar, begins the way the prophets did, with a date and water, the fast broken gently before the larger food arrives. Then, hours later, in the deep quiet before dawn, comes the second surge. Families rising in the dark for suhoor, the pre-dawn meal that must carry them through the coming day. Kitchens and shops briefly alive at 3 in the morning. For a month, the ordinary day is folded and reversed. People sleep in the afternoon and wake at night. Work slows and worship deepens. The table that gathers the family gathers it after dark, larger than ever. The sun still rules the schedule. It always has, but now it rules it by its absence, marking not when to work, but when at last to eat and drink again. And this is the deeper truth of the Gulf night, Ramadan or not. The life the outsider looked for at noon and could not find has simply moved. It is here, after dark. Step out at 9 or 10 in the evening, and the hollow afternoon city is gone. Families are walking the waterfronts in the cool. Children are out, properly out, running, playing, at an hour that would seem impossible elsewhere, because in high summer, the only bearable time to be a child outdoors is close to midnight. Cafes fill. The scent of shisha and grilled meat drifts along the corniche. The parks that baked and emptied at 2 in the afternoon are at 11 at night, full of picnicking families spread on the grass. And on the rooftops and in the walled courtyards of older homes, another kind of evening unfolds. The family gathered on cushions under the open sky, the day's heat finally lifting off the stone, tea going round, the youngest asleep across a lap while the talk runs late. This is the hour the whole day was arranged to protect. Everything before it, the early rising, the noon retreat, the careful conservation of energy through the worst of the sun, was, in a sense, a way of saving the day up so that it could be spent here, together, in the cool. And when the long summer finally breaks, the Gulf goes back to the one place all of this began, the desert. For a few months of winter, when the heat loosens its grip, families leave the cooled cities on weekends and drive out into the sands. They pitch camps that are, in effect, the majlis rebuilt in the open air. Carpets laid over the dunes, cushions, a fire, the dalla warming at its edge exactly as it would at home. Children ride down the slopes of the dunes. The night comes down clear and cold, and the same coffee is poured under a sky full of the same stars the pearl divers once steered by. Here, too, the old arts return. A falconer lifts a hooded bird onto his gloved fist. Falconry is among the most treasured inheritances of this coast, a skill carried down from the days when a trained falcon meant meat on a hard winter's journey. The bird is worth a fortune now, and flown more for love than need. But the bond between the man and the falcon is real and old, and to watch it is to watch the desert gulf the city was built on top of. It would be easy to call this nostalgia, the wealthy playing at the hard life their grandparents fled, but it is something a little deeper than that. It is a people returning, once a year, to the ground that made them, the sand, the fire, the shared cup, the open sky. The city, with its glass and its cooled air and its manufactured water, is the newcomer here. The desert is the original, and the Gulf, for all its towers, has never quite let go of it. But the ease of that night rests on things it is easy not to see, and an honest look at a Gulf day has to see them. It rests first on a memory of thirst. Within the lifetime of the oldest people now sitting in those courtyards, this was a land of genuine scarcity, of brackish wells, of drought, of the pearl diver's hard and dangerous season, of a coast that could feed only so many. The frugal habits around water, the deep instinct not to waste, were not quaint traditions passed down for their charm. They were the residue of a time when a wasted skin of water could be the difference between reaching the next well and not. The restraint you saw at dawn, in that careful splash before prayer, is the fingerprint of that thirst. And it rests second on the labor of people whose day looks nothing like the one we have followed. The gleaming towers, the chilled malls, the picnics on watered green lawns, the very desalination plants we are about to reach. All of them were built and are run in large part by migrant workers from South Asia and beyond, who make up much of the population of these states and often the majority of the workforce. Their day is the other Gulf day, earlier, harder, hotter, lived in shared quarters far from the majlis and the family platter. The comfortable evening in the cool is real. So is the second day underneath it that makes the first one possible. To describe the Gulf honestly is to hold both in view at once. Which brings us at last back to the water, to the tap and the cup and the rule about the river. Remember the fact that opened all of this, that not one of these 6 countries has a permanent river. no stream that runs all year, no lake to drink from. In a temperate land, this would be a death sentence for a city. Here are cities of millions: Doha, Dubai, Kuwait City, Riyadh, Manama, Muscat, standing in a place with almost no natural fresh water at all. The question is not really how they got rich. The question is how they get a glass of water. The answer is that they make it from the sea. Along the shores of the Gulf stand more than 400 desalination plants, vast facilities that pull in seawater and drive it under enormous pressure and heat through a process that strips out the salt and returns fresh water at the other end. Together, the 6 Gulf states produce something on the order of 40% of all the desalinated water made anywhere on Earth. It is one of the largest, quietest feats of engineering on the planet, and most of the world has never given it a thought.
And the degree of dependence
Is almost total. In Qatar, more than 99% of the drinking water, very nearly every drop, comes from desalination. In Kuwait, around 90%. In Oman, more than 80%. In Bahrain, the great majority. Saudi Arabia draws most of its drinking water this way. The United Arab Emirates, a very large share. Somewhere near 100 million people across this region wake up each morning and drink the sea, made sweet by machines, without ever thinking of it as anything other than water from the tap. And here lies one more of the Gulf's quiet contradictions. This water, the most heavily manufactured water on Earth, wrung from the sea at great cost in energy and money, arrives at the citizens' tap as some of the cheapest in the world, and in several of these states, for nationals, very nearly free. The state carries the true cost, quietly, as it has since the oil began to flow. A household turns a tap and pays almost nothing for a glass of water that a chain of vast machines worked through the night to make. The effect is a strange one. Water that costs so much to produce and so little to buy gets used freely. For the green lawns, the long showers, the washed cars, even as, underneath it all, the old instinct to conserve still runs quietly through the culture. The Gulf drinks the sea, prices it like rain, and remembers, in its oldest habits, that it is neither. This is the thing beneath everything else we have watched today. The coffee poured a quarter full at dawn, made with desalinated water. The careful splash before prayer, desalinated water. The rice steamed for the shared platter, the tea at midnight, the fountains, the watered lawns where the children played past 11. All of it, every drop, pulled from a salt sea and turned drinkable a few hours before it reached a human hand. The most ordinary substance in any home, the one thing no one is supposed to have to think about, is here the end product of a continuous, colossal, invisible act of manufacture. And it is a life balanced on a narrow edge. A land with a river can lose a power station and still drink. These cities cannot. Cut the desalination plants by accident, by failure, by any interruption, and a modern Gulf city has, at most, a few days of stored water before the taps run dry. There is no fallback of rain or river underneath. The whole shining, comfortable, cooled, and irrigated life of the Gulf sits on top of a machine that must never stop turning the sea into water. It is perhaps the most quietly fragile daily life on Earth, precisely because it feels the least fragile from the inside. Now go back to that 1,000-year-old teaching, the one about not wasting water even on the banks of a flowing river. For most of its history, that rule was a lesson in humility, aimed at people who did have rivers, reminding them that abundance is no excuse for waste. But carried here to this coast by a people who never had a river at all, it reads differently. It reads like instructions. Do not waste, even where water seems to flow freely, because here, where the tap flows freely, that flow is not a gift of the land. It is squeezed from the sea at enormous cost, drop by manufactured drop. The frugal splash at dawn, the small cup, the whole disposition of restraint that runs through this culture, a discipline shaped in an age of wells and thirst, turns out to be exactly, uncannily, the discipline a civilization that drinks the sea would need to invent if it did not already have it. That is the quiet genius the skyline hides. Nothing here is really random. The quarter-full cup, the shared platter eaten from with one hand, the day arranged around the sun and the heat, the reflex of not wasting water. These were never just charming customs. Each one is doing a job. Each one is an answer, worked out over centuries, to the single hardest fact of this place, that it is a rich land laid over a thirsty one, and always was.
The outsider's picture,
The towers, the gold, the bought and effortless luxury was not wrong exactly, it was only shallow. Beneath the ease is not more ease. Beneath the ease is discipline and memory, and a very old carefulness about a very scarce thing, dressed up so well in comfort that you would never guess it was there. The day closes the way it opened. In the dark, before the light, at a tap. A hand turns it, and a small stream of water runs into a cupped palm. Just enough. The face is washed, the hands, the crown of the head, the feet, 3 times over, in their old order, with that startling economy of water that a stranger would take for thrift, and a local would not think about at all. The prayer is offered as the first grey line opens on the horizon, and the water that was cupped in that palm and let go and not wasted, an hour ago, it was the Gulf. 6 countries along one salt sea that learned to drink it, not because they were rich, but because, long before the wealth, they had already learned the one lesson the place would always demand, that in a land with no river, every drop is a decision, and the oldest manners are really the oldest survival. Thank you for spending this day with us across the 6 shores of the Arabian Gulf. Until the next journey, take a breath and stay a while.